Yeah, I'm from Philadelphia. I was a fourth grader. Yeah, I was a fourth. I was a fourth grader in a small private Christian school in Northeast Philadelphia. Um, and because we were in a Christian school, we have this weekly chapel. So it's kind of like an assembly for the school that revolves around Christian faith. And so it was during chapel that we got the news about it. Interestingly, my mother was a teacher at my school at the time, and my father is an X-ray tech. So he had seen the images coming from the television, called my mother, who then informed our principal during chapel that this had happened. And, our principal said that, a plane struck the World Trade Center, didn't know what that meant, had never heard of the World Trade Center. But, we finished chapel, headed to our classrooms. They rolled out the TV, and then you started seeing the images, and it didn't take long for them to dismiss us for the day. I imagine because Philadelphia is like one of those big cities that they just didn't want to take any chances. So got home, my parents were home, both home. We started watching, the news, and it didn't register as real to me. It just felt like a movie scene. I didn't know much of anything, but I quickly had to educate myself because of the reaction after 9/11, specifically towards me as someone who apparently resembles the people responsible for the attack. So that's what I can recall about specifically September 11th.
Absolutely. And that really jives, excuse me, I think with the collective experience a lot of us went through who were at. I'm hearing people say, it was surreal. Like, what even happened? Like, is this a joke? Like, the reactions have been, very much so in that same realm of not even, thinking about it, that it actually happened. Like, what? I don't believe it. But I think that, something we all saw too in the days and weeks that followed, I feel like that there was this great push towards nationalism and patriotism and America first, that sort of. So I'm wondering how that felt for you, and what you saw in that sort of regard.
Definitely saw a lot of rallying around the nation, and I didn't think anything of it because, I was born and raised here in America. My mom was also born and raised here. So I didn't really understand racism until this. I didn't know I was any different per se. I went to, even though it was a small private Christian school, my class was pretty diverse in terms of ethnic diversity. So I was never really othered until 9/11, and not by my own classmates, but just in the neighborhood, in society. So it was confusing to me to see that happen. My family is Christian, so we didn't really identify at all with the attackers. My father is from Pakistan, and he left Pakistan to come to America in part for religious freedom and safety concerns from being a minority in a Muslim dominant country. So we knew who we were, and we were proud of it. And but people didn't see that. So they would just look at us. And I think there was such a push for nationalism that did not include people who looked like me. It was a very white-centered viewpoint. And so anyone who remotely resembled the images of Osama and Al-Qaeda were automatically looped into this us versus them type of mentality. So I think one of the clearest examples of this that I can share So I'm the oldest of five, but at the time it was three. And my brother and I would walk to school. It's like a 5-10 minute walks, just a few blocks from our home. We did this every single day, just him and I. I was 11, he was 9. Um, and we're walking home, we're walking, either walking to school or walking home. And like people from across the street just start like jeering at us and calling us terrorists. And I wasn't sure where this was coming from. Um, I'm not even sure if we told our parents right away, just because like it was like, were they talking to us? Like, I'm not sure why that's happening. Um, and that was like the first time I think like I started to connect what happened to what we were experiencing in that moment. There was a day where it was like a twin day at school. So you picked a fellow classmate or someone in the school to dress up with. And my brother and I dressed up in these camo t-shirts because they were matching and we had them. Um, Not a good decision, apparently. So that put a further target on us about uh, being militant Muslim kids. Um, I think it was just really frustrating from that viewpoint. Is like I'm not Afghani or Iraqi or Muslim, but even if I was, there's nothing inherently wrong with any of those aspects of who a person is. But it was being demonized as that, and anyone who remotely resembled that was also viewed in that light. It's kind of what we're seeing with COVID and Asians, other Asians. I consider myself an Asian. We're South Asian, but people think we're different. But we're part of the same communal group. I think it really hit home for the family on July 4th. So we lived in a neighborhood that had a community parade. It's been going on for 100 years. In fact, the parade route past our house. So we, decorate our home and a ton of flags. My father was super proud to be an American citizen, kind of instilled that in us, patriotism. So we decked out our home in flags, red, white, and blue. We had lawn chairs out, and every parade, the cars would throw candy at the kids, and all the kids would grab stuff. So before 9/11, no issues whatsoever. People were super friendly with us. They throw candy our ways. They say Happy Fourth and wave the flag at us. I think 2002 was the first one after the attack, and you could tell that people were treating us differently. Very few people threw candy our ways. Very few people said Happy Fourth to us. At some point, they actually changed the route so it wouldn't cross our house. I don't know if that was like specifically because of us or for logistical reasons, but we no longer felt as accepted by the community, even though we had been living there for several years. And it really made me wonder, like, what was happening and why were people insistent on treating us differently. And it hurt. I mean, I was 11 years old and I somewhat understood, but my younger siblings didn't exactly know what was going on and why we weren't getting candy and why people weren't being friendly towards us and why people would give us weird looks, why people would say things. My family was also going through a really nasty divorce at the time, so we didn't really have this like sit down family conversation about what was happening. So a lot of it was like kind of left for us to figure out. And it was around that time, maybe a few years after, where we went from a private small Christian school to a large Bucks County public school. And the viewpoint was totally different. And kind of reliving trauma that we experienced just a few years back because, it's Bucks County, it's super white, super Christian, and here's this minority new kid, and like all the questions start happening. And I didn't feel super welcomed. So even years after the event, there's still this lingering trauma and fear of being othered or targeted, even though it was pretty quickly identified that whoever did this was a radical group that claimed to be Muslim. And I didn't have a lot of Muslim friends at the time. And I just felt a lot of compassion for them because I knew what it was like to be discriminated against simply because of how I looked, not even engaging in conversation and trying to figure out who did it. But you're right, I think there was such this like movement to kind of be super patriotic and super nationalist that it just completely disregarded people who were just as proud to be Americans, but just looked different.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the excuse me, one of the other interviews that I did with a woman, I'm not sure if you know her. Her name is Raya Abdullah.
Mhm,
She's the operations manager for Make the Road Pennsylvania. I'm not sure if you had the chance to speak with her at all or not.
mhm.
She's really nice. And her family are refugees from Pakistan.
Mhm.
And she said that one of the biggest fears that they had right after 9/11 was about internment camps because of the way
Oh,
Japanese people were treated after Pearl Harbor.
mhm.
And I'm wondering if that was something that was ever on your radar
It
either.
wasn't. It wasn't. In fact, like I hadn't learned about internment camps until high school, and even then, it wasn't like it didn't get enough time. So it wasn't even a thought in my mind. I was 11, so
Yeah.
I hadn't heard about that. I mean, I still wasn't sure where the Trade Center was until you saw the skyscrapers, and I'd never been to. I'd been to New York City, but not in like an identifiable part. I don't think it was in Manhattan. I think I had relatives somewhere in Queens. But I still was like, where's the World Trade Center? Why is it important? What happened? And then you hear about, you know, a crash in Pennsylvania. So I was like, were they trying to hit us? The Pentagon. So I was like, it was like clearly like there was a lot going on for all of us. And I wasn't even sure like what happened, why it happened. And then we, you know, we declared war. And it was just a lot to process on a personal note. But then like pairing that with how we were treated in society, it was just like, I don't know what to do. People would, you know, assume our ethnic identity, assume our religious identity, and then like treat us differently as a result. And it was like a safety concern too, because you didn't know what they would do. Like if they assumed like, you know, I think at one point someone called me Osama's son or something like that. Um, and I'm like, I don't know how to correct you because I feel like if I try to correct you, you're going to be even more emboldened. So it's like we didn't really have like a defense mechanism to kick in to be like, okay, just like fight or flight. And we were new kids in a very white school, and that was not like for us. Like it was basically like just sit down and take it. You know, like not do not engage. I remember at one point uh, when my parents divorced, we were living in a row home in Philly, and our next door neighbor etched into our front step, like, go home, fucking Indians. And I was like, I don't understand. And this was like a few years after 9/11. Actually, maybe it wasn't even a few years because my parents divorced in 2001. Crazy year. And I remember, yeah, our neighbors had etched in with a screwdriver, like go home fucking Indians. And first of all, like my family doesn't cuss. So like I was like, oh, this is a word that I'm still learning. Um, and I don't know why they would ask us to go home. And like why would they vandalize our property? I didn't know. Like I didn't, and we had never like said anything to them. We were nice and respectful. But I think you're right. Like when people have this mentality, they resort to whatever action they feel is defending their country or their family, not realizing that the implications and consequences that it has for other people who are the targets of that. So yeah, it was traumatizing. I don't think I was able to fully grasp that until I grew up.
Mhm.
But yeah, it was a really, really crazy time. And I think we were even more motivated to find out who did it and what happened because we were trying to absolve ourselves from being associated with this group. I even harbored a little bit of resentment towards people from Afghanistan or even Pakistan just because I was like, I can't change the color of my skin. People still think that like I'm them and I'm not. So I wanted to like distance myself from my ethnic identity out of safety. But I fully embraced my brownness and I wish I hadn't been so hard on myself then, but I think it was a completely different situation. And I was 11 years old and now I'm 31. So it's a, you know, it was a lot to process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think because we were at that age, I don't know, the next thing I wanted to ask about was I feel like we grew up in the 90s, technology, we're the generation of technology, everything's wonderful, housing market's great, economy's great, America's the best place to be in the world. And then I feel like this happened and it sort of, after 9/11 happened, it sort of broke that illusion of safety for me, like that America was this untouchable beacon in the world, number one America. And I'm just wondering if that's something you might have experienced too.
I don't think I had a proper worldview until after 9/11. Like, I think
Gotcha.
my father, you know, he immigrated here in the 80s. I was raised American, you know, I didn't, you know, they only spoke languages from the homeland when they wanted to hide something from me. So it's like we were very like they're like my home was America. It had always been America. Like I acknowledge that like my family came from somewhere. So like I didn't and you know, I was always told like your family came here for a better life. So it was always like the America was the place to be.
Mhm.
Out of any place in the world, like this is where you came. So I think when the attacks happened, you know, there was this like second guessing, like, are we safe here? Was this the right decision to come here? Um, my family didn't really dwell on that, but it was something that I started to think about. And like airports all of a sudden had relevance. Um, to this day, I'm still scared to go through security at an airport. My family members have been randomly selected to be screened, and we know exactly where that stems from. I have a brother with autism, and so when he was screened, it was a very traumatic process for him and my mother. So like there's still lingering effects of 9/11 even to this day. Like I feel a little bit more secure uh, in who I am, and like if I were to be searched, I wouldn't immediately tie it to 9/11. But there's still that fear of like airports where we flew fairly often and took vacations, but now it's like, are people going to be looking at me? Like, can I be left alone with a bag? Like, what? Like, it's like I started having thoughts that I didn't have before. Um, and I personally have never been to India or Pakistan. My family has roots in both. Um, so like I didn't have anything to compare America to. You know, some people had come here and were like, oh, you know, we were safer back home, ironically. I didn't have that. And I didn't think that visiting India or Pakistan would make me feel safer at all. So yeah, I think I started to have these thoughts after 9/11, but before that, I I didn't.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking back to, I've had a couple people mention that they've sort of marked 9/11 as like the fastest growth time. Like you had the innocence of childhood, and then 9/11 happened, which for older millennials, they were in high school, they were driving, a little bit older. For us younger millennials, we were still, in elementary school. But I'm wondering if that jives with you at all, or if you still use that as like a time marker event in your life.
I absolutely do. So September 11 happened, and then December of that year was when my parents officially divorced. So like, in addition to the divorce where I had to grow up and be like the oldest male figure in the family, paired with this life-changing event that targeted people who looked like me, I absolutely like mark it in my life as like a really rapid maturing,
Mhm.
where like I had to grow up, not just because my family was like breaking apart, but because like our our identity was, you know, a target for people in whatever, you know, in whatever manner. So I definitely like that changed my life. It changed my family's life. And I think, you know, at 11, you're still trying to figure out who you are. Um, I'm gay and I came out, you know, at 25 and I wasn't even thinking of these things. So like there was a lot going on in this 11-year-old head about like what life is. So, but I definitely like, it's like, I think it's the most identifiable chapter of my life that I can point to as like, oh, I grew up here, aside from coming out. Like that was like a day I won't forget and clearly like something that impacted my life profoundly. So yeah, I definitely can identify with 9/11 being like a point where Stephen grew up.
Yeah, absolutely. And then it's so weird because even like when I'm thinking about it, it's like everyone can remember so vividly like where they were, like how you said you were in the chapel. I remember what classroom I was in elementary school. And it seems like it was just yesterday. And I know I sound so old saying that, right? Oh, it was only yesterday, but it really has been 2 decades. So I'm wondering, like I'm trying to articulate this idea that this was like a defining life moment for our entire generation. Like, you know, older generations had the JFK assassination or Man on the Moon or, you know, Pearl Harbor even. And it's interesting now to think about that there are kids in college right now that didn't live through it,
Yes.
but
Mhm.
we lived through it. So I'm wondering what you think about that, or if you ever think about that, or what, you know, what feelings come to mind, you know, thinking that it's been 2 decades and now there's this whole now it's the next generation and we're like old folks talking about rationing sugar.
I know. I like, it's hard to believe it's been 20 years because like anything that's 20 years old feels old to me.
Yeah.
Like, but it also is compounded by the fact that I have siblings that were born after 9/11.
Oh,
So
okay.
my father, after the divorce, my father remarried, and I have a half brother and half sister. My half brother was born in '05, and my half sister was born in '08. So they were born in a post 9/11 world where they didn't know about it, and now they're learning about 9/11 in their textbooks, which is a completely different experience than a lived one. So I, you know, the world for them is probably profoundly different than the one that I was in. They were also born in a world of social media. I can't imagine if Facebook was around in 2001. Like, I wouldn't be able to like save myself from the trauma of having to watch it over and over again. At least you could turn off the TV and like steal away. But this, it's a very different environment. And to think that like someone who was born on 9/11 will be legally able to drink next year is like mind blowing for me. The fact that like so much time has passed, yet you can still vividly remember what happened to you. I wonder what that moment is for the next generation. Part of me wants to say the insurrection, and I hate to say that. But like that, like the images from there reminded me so much of 9/11 just because of the coverage and the horror. And it happened, you know, in a very prominent part of our country. Um, and I hope that, you know, it doesn't take something traumatic to recall a childhood memory. You know, the landing on the moon wasn't traumatic, it was exciting and people remember that. But unfortunately, my childhood is, you know, marked by 9/11. And I think my teenage years were completely impacted by 9/11 and just how society reacted to it. So Yeah, 20 years feels like a very long time, but also not a long time at all.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's interesting that you bring up the insurrection too, because that's exactly what I was thinking for this next generation. It's either, or it could be both, the insurrection plus quarantines,
Mm, that
COVID.
part. Mhm.
Yeah. And I'm wondering too, because I feel like this was 9/11 was probably the first time that we could see like something traumatic, an attack like this live, right?
Yeah.
Like when that second plane hit, they were reporting on the first plane hit. And I've been doing some research into PTSD, and some research is coming out about how even if you didn't, like if you weren't in the place where the event occurred, but if you were watching live footage on TV, um, if you were very well connected to it, that could still really traumatize you. And I'm wondering if those images that you might have seen on 9/11, in school when they rolled in the TV card or anything like that, if those are the things like you very vividly remember.
I think so, because when it happened, like, I think my parents did their best to shield us from it. Like,
Mhm.
I think they turned on the TV, number one, to figure out like what the hell was going on. And then like once we realized like it was like going to be tied to us in some way, it was like it's better you don't watch it. They didn't say don't watch it, but it's just like I think what they did as parents. I think any parent would probably be like, how do I explain this to my kids? So I definitely remember that. And then, I became a journalist. So, and I went to the museum at the time, and they have a very touching, well, they had a very touching exhibit where they had, the front pages from across the country and around the world, and they had part of the tower. And, um, you know, I was reminded of like how I didn't really get it back then. And then you see the images of people covered in ash and bleeding and running for their lives. And it still doesn't feel real to me, but like it was very real. And it just, I think because I was 11 and rather naive and didn't know, what exactly had happened, it still doesn't register to me as something traumatic
Gotcha.
to watch, if that makes sense. I
Mhm.
think the trauma is more based in how I was treated afterwards.
Yeah,
Um, I mean, now looking back, yes, certainly. Like, I think if I were older and was watching those images, I would be traumatized by that. But I don't find my trauma in those images. I find the trauma in how people treated me and my family, because that changed my life.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then the last question that I had for you, I'm wondering if there's anything that you do to mark September 11th. Like I know in school, I remember the years after we had like that moment of silence. Um, as a journalist, I've covered many like memorial ceremonies. I know that communities get together for flag raisings. Is that anything that you do? If not, it's okay. But I figured I would ask.
Basically, what you said is what I had been doing,
Mhm.
in school, the moment of silence or a special ceremony, and then as a journalist covering community events. I don't do anything to remember it. I used to post, never forget, and like just kind of hop on the bandwagon of like posting American flags and things like that. I think the flag has become so politicized now that like I don't even feel comfortable posting the flag, because it will inevitably point to some sort of political leaning, unfortunately. And I didn't feel very American for many years after 9/11. I was like, I am American and I'm proud to be an American, but I feel like imposter syndrome a little bit. So my family never did anything to remember 9/11. I don't think I will. I do plan to have kids someday, and I really wonder like how they'll learn about 9/11. My husband has a completely different version of 9/11 in his mind. So I don't do anything to celebrate it, or not even celebrate it, but to acknowledge it.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
Yeah.
And then there's, oh shit, I didn't mean to keep you over half an hour.
You're fine.
Well, that was really the end of my questions.
Yeah.
Anything else that you'd want people to know or you'd want to add?
I just see that how, our Asian siblings are being targeted and continue to be targeted. There was an incident at Lehigh University yesterday where someone was assaulting, for lack of a better word, Asian students and Asian staff. That's exactly what was happening right after 9/11 towards people who were Middle Eastern or South Asian or resembled such. So I'm still seeing, instances where people don't educate themselves and assume certain things and then, take that information and hurt other people. So even though 9/11 has passed, there are still events like COVID or the insurrection where like people like just continue to terrorize. And in fact, I would call them the terrorists rather than, calling me one, because I was terrorized by the treatment I was getting. And I'm sure that for, many in the Asian community, that they're also feeling like victims of terror for something that they had no part in. So I guess that's the one big connection I've been making lately.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's poignant and it's a salient connection.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially everything that's going on, with Afghanistan too.
Yeah, I'm worried. I'm not so worried about that for me, but I can totally see, how that could be harmful. I'll leave you with this. The fact that the Delta variant has not been called the India variant is such a profound blessing, because we were able to name it by like a Greek letter as opposed to the country of origin. Like that has saved my community from being as targeted as Chinese and other ethnicities that resemble them, because it flat out wasn't named as a country to begin with. And Delta is like the hot variant right now. And I can only imagine if it had been referred to by the president, by general society as like the India variant, like I would be dealing with a lot more unwanted attention. So there's a lot in what things are named, like that has significance. So I think that's one of the reasons why there was such, lashing after being called the China flu or the China virus, because like it matters. It matters what you call things. It's just another layer of safety that you have to be aware of. So I'm just grateful that there are things in the world right now that could trigger trauma in my life back to 9/11, but thankfully that hasn't happened yet.